With GPU prices finally at a decent level, I decided it was time to build a computer. I haven't built one since 2005. I've built quite a few up until that point, but I haven't built one since then. In 2008, I bought a Dell XPS, which was top of the line, and it worked really well. And I've upgraded it as time passed. But I didn't game much on it, so I didn't really care. I usually gamed like on consoles. Well, I wanted to get into recording. I wanted to get into some higher end gaming and build a computer. Now, this is not meant to be a tutorial. The audio was corrupt when I imported the recording, so I'm going to have to talk through it as we go. But for the most part, it's clear enough to see what I'm doing. All right, let's get to it. So I unpacked the case and installed the fans. Unfortunately, the recording of that is no longer available. But here I'm basically explaining that the two fans on the top, the one fan on the top and the one fan on the back are exhaust fans, as well as the three fans on the front and the fan on the bottom are intake fans, creating positive pressure. As for the motherboard, I went with an EVGA Classified Z690. The processor is an i7-2700k. I highly suggest going with a K over the KF, as the onboard video is very helpful when it comes time to troubleshoot. Here we're installing the CPU cooler, which is a Noctua NHU12A. And by the way, all the links will be available to the parts I used. This fan installs in two different directions, so you can have the part that sticks out like I'm putting right here towards the RAM, or you can have it towards the back panel. I originally put it towards the RAM thinking that there wouldn't be enough space for the fan for the panel, which I was incorrect, and you'll see that later on getting replaced. And as a side note, the U12A outperforms the D15, and that is because it runs an extra copper tube even though it has less heatsink. For the RAM, I went with TForce Vulcan, running a speed of 5600 with a CAS of 32, which for some reason was cheaper than most of the RAMs running a CAS of 36, so of course I snagged it up. If you don't have a soft surface to build your motherboard on, then I would suggest using the anti-static bag that comes with a motherboard to build on top of. Otherwise you could scratch the bottom of the motherboard. This is the part where I noticed the CPU cooler was not giving me enough room for the RAM. I mean, it worked, but I didn't like the way it looked. So I ended up moving it and flipping it around. Now what you're going to see here is with a CPU cooler off, the spread of the thermal paste is perfect. There was zero leakage anywhere. So I would definitely go with what Noctua recommends, which is the 2 centimeter dot in the center and the 2 small dots around it. I thought it worked great. It's never really a good idea to install your fans before the motherboard. I did it anyways because I knew I had enough room for the case. Which, by the way, I'm using the Lian Lancool 2 mesh. This is an EATX motherboard, so it has a total of 9 screws. One of them was by the fan, and I wasn't able to get to it. so I had to remove it and reinstall it. Oh, and get yourself a long screwdriver. That really helps with the motherboard installation. It also helped with the CPU cooler installation. On the Lian case, you have this cover for your wiring, which is all fine and dandy. Unfortunately, the bracket that supports the cover was blocking the path for my front panel USB port. So I could have just drilled it right there and then, got the bracket out and squeezed it in. Unfortunately, I didn't want to get a bunch of metal shavings in the case, which are going to be hard to clean out. So I ended up removing the motherboard, removing the panel, drilling out the bracket, and putting it back in, which left a little hole right there by the wire, which I ended up just putting a Noctua sticker over it. And here I was commenting on why the CPU cooler header was to the right of the RAM, and to the left of the RAM where the CPU cooler header should have been is actually a fan header. Dumb design, but it made me do this little loop with the wiring, which kind of sucked, but we got through it. With all that out of the way, it was time to install the power supply, which is a 1000 watt EVGA G+. I already had ran the wiring before, so all I had to do is just slide it into place, plug everything in. It was nice and simple. The power supply came with 4 pads, so you can set the power supply on it, but the Lian case actually has 4 pre-installed in there, so that wasn't necessary to use. Came with lots of extra wiring and way more than I needed. Here I'm talking about the 6-fan hub system that comes with the Lian Lancool 2 mesh. It wasn't very straightforward and there was 0 instructions on how to use it, but basically you take the power from all your fans and plug them in there, which is the reason I went with 6 fans. And then you take the RGB, plug it all together, and then that goes into your RGB header. It's all said and done. This is what the wiring looks like when it's all cleaned up. I can't give praise to Lian. It was a little hard to route wires in this case, but for the most part they provided you with enough channels and enough holes to get everything routed through. It's a little tight because the case is so large. The bottom panel of the case is perforated, so keep in mind when you do install an RGB fan, it will light that entire section down there and you will see some of the wires, so it's best to clean it up as best as you can. Overall, the panels did a fantastic job of covering the wires, and the case overall is a fantastic build and I would highly recommend. Although some better instructions would have been very helpful. The power supply had extra wire straps, so I ended up using them in the motherboard to cover the 24-pin, the USB, and the video card power wires. If you've made it this far, please comment below with what I did right, what I did wrong, maybe what I can do better in the future. And please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, as it will greatly help me for making future content.